Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cohen. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. Now, you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, and this Lyman Mill had the greatest kind of changeover of any mill in Holyoke.
So that's awesome. So today we're going to be talking about the Lyman Mill. So tell us about the early history of this mill.
All right, it's the first of the mills. It used to be called in the very beginning the Hadley Falls Mill Number 1 because it and the Hadley Mills, which is Hadley Falls Mills Number 2, were made first. They were making the wooden dam, they were making the canals, the worker homes, and they were making Mill 1 and 2. So a lot of work was being done. And the early history is that they were a cotton mill. And they wanted Holyoke to become a cotton city, just like Lowell was. And so the early years of this mill were they put spindles in there, they put big looms, and they made their own cotton, and they made their own finished clothes too. And they had their own stores to sell the material in. So it was a complete system, going from the raw cotton brought right up in the trains, put into the mills, and changed over. The Lyman Mills employed 2,000 people in any given week, which is incredible. Imagine all the looms that are going, all the spindles, all the workers going all over the place. It must have been a great and busy sight.
So now how does the canal function around the mill?
Now, for this one, in this mill only in Holyoke, you have the raceways and the horizontal position and exposed in the beginning. And a raceway is a tunnel that ends up going below the mill and hits the turbine by water falling from above onto the cups of the turbine. And these were hydromechanical turbines, and they would spin all the mechanical elements in the mill. Anything that had to need power had to be connected by a belt to one of the many 12 turbines that were inside here. Now, this was a unique mill that the raceways were elevated for a great long time. And the reason why is here at this position, the elevation change from the top to the bottom was quite drastic compared to other mills. And so they elevated the raceways, kept them horizontal until they got into the back of the mill, and the turbines are all in the back of the mills, the 12 big turbines. And you could actually see these exposed races. There were a few other places where you had this, but not like this mill, which I believe had 3 exposed raceways.
So now quickly, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill in our listeners, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of his tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. There he has both videos of the various stops on each tour, also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, it's BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they're perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family, or for group parties, especially those special occasions or get-togethers. They're also good for just getting outdoors for the day. So I'm getting back to our interview. What has become of the mill in the last 3 decades?
Okay, in recent decades, it has been changed over from a true mill into a retail place where you can have things like a dance studio, you can have a bagel shop, you can have doctors and dentists, you can have lawyers and realtors. And so it has about 60 the unique businesses inside. And this is very wonderful because you can have as much inside of here, as much production out of this mill as it once had. And it's great to see that someone could change it over. Now, it used to be owned by the Aubin family, where the father of the family had tried to change it over into a mill that produced, and he only somewhat successful. But then his son, about 23 years ago, changed it over into a retail outlet. And this year, and we're in the year 2023, as of this podcast, he sold it to two people, and they're going to keep it in the way they have it function now. And that's great because it's a very important place, and it's a very functional place.
And so, why do you make the mill the centerpiece of your canal tour?
Okay, so when I start most of my canal tours, especially the one that covers the first and second level canal, I always meet the people at Holyoke Heritage State Park, and we go through that park, and we go down the second canal walkway, and then start on Ray Street and head towards Open Square, or the Lyman Mill. And the reason why it's a classical look to it, where you can look out the back part of it as the water comes out the back, and again the people count up the amount of port races or tunnels coming out the back, and they can see that there's 12 tunnels. And then I tell how many of them are still being used, and they can see that water still flowing out very quickly out of two of them. And that gives you a sense that there's actually two old turbines underneath the Lyman mills. So they're generating their own electricity. In fact, on the vast majority of days, they generate enough electricity to keep all their tenants using the electricity that's generated in the bottom of that mill. That's an incredible fact. It's called a net zero mill. And hopefully that can keep going and keep being used in this way. I also like to go in this direction because remember, it's the first two of the canal-based mills in Holyoke, right? So this was the Hadley Falls Mill number 1, and I point out that behind it, you can see the open raceways, and behind that, across the first level canal, you can see the store that they sold out of. So they own all the property that's across the first level canal also. So they were a big group. And they also owned the largest property for their workers to have homes. But the original is not there. So along Lyman Street, there are now their homes, but since 1930, they were taken out, and the originals lasted from 1848 to 1930, and you could see how big the Lyman Mills complex was. You had the homes, you had the first levels, the second level canal, the open raceways, the big, enormous Lyman Mill. Now, the last thing to point out about the history of Lyman Mill is that in 1927, they left Holyoke, and William Whiten took over this Lyman Mill and converted it into a paper mill. So the Lyman Mill was probably the first mill that ever left Holyoke, and they left for South Carolina because they didn't need the power that the canal was generating. They can get that, and they can get cheaper labor down in South Carolina.
Mm-hmm. So now, thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in as well. You can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website, holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And be sure to check out this thing. Keep an eye out for those upcoming 2024 scheduled tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning in to our podcast. We are coming to you from Chicopee, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Coney. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, Jacoby, and South Hadley, Mass. So now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, and most of these mills tours are part of the canal tour.
And today he'll be educating us on the Hadley Mill. So, why and when was the Hadley Mill built?
All right, the Hadley Mill was one of the original mills in Holyoke. It was built to be a cotton mill. When they first envisioned the Holyoke Canal system, they envisioned it to be a cotton city, just like Lowell, because pretty much the same people built both of them. And the Lyman Mill and the Hadley Mill were going to be the two mills of the Hadley Falls Company. They're going to be owned by the company that made the canals itself. And they were called that in the beginning. Hadley Falls Company number 1 was the Lyman Mill. Hadley Falls Company number 2 was the Hadley Mill. Now, both of them were quite ready early on. The Lyman Mill was a little earlier than the Hadley Mill. And the Hadley Mill is located on the start of the bend of the second level canal. It's towards the north of the canal system, and it takes the water in from the second level canal, which had come from the first level canal, and it puts it through the tunnels into the turbines, and it sends it out into the Connecticut River, or later it sends it out into the channel that was built in front of the Connecticut River. So that's what it was. Now, it was made about 1850s, and then it of course changes just like everything else, and it's a very expansive mill. And along the way, I'm going to tell you about one very particular feature. They made the Hadley Falls homes that are across the canal from itself, and that's for its canal workers. I'm also going to tell you what happened to the whole system, and then I'm going to tell you about why this was so important to Holyoke, this particular mill. Now, this mill in the beginning was making cotton. I'll give you a general description of what was what. If you look at the Hadley Mills now, there's administration buildings. They're on the canal, but they're not on the power side of the canal. They're in front of the canal. And they were made a little bit later, and the reason why was electricity came around. They weren't used very much for production. They were used just for administration and for sales. A lot of these fiber mills in Holyoke sold their produce right at site, so people could go to one of their stores and go in there and buy a cotton shirt, for instance, cotton pants. And that wasn't always true about the paper mills, but it was true about these cotton mills. Now, between the second level canal and the river, there were so many pieces to this Hadley Mill. And I'll tell you about some of the floors. Most of the buildings were 4 floors high, and most of the buildings that are parallel to the canal and the river were for production. And I'll give you a rundown. Usually the start of production started on the 4th floor of each one, and then they'd come downstairs, the next floor, to do another set of production. And so on the 4th floor, they would start to do some of the spinning of the cotton. And they got a lot of their cotton from the South United States. And so down on the third floor, they would do some spinning. So you would have spinning on the 4th floor, and then more intricate spinning on the next floor down. All right, you're trying to get this fiber ready to be going down the 2nd floor, and here is where you do the warp and weft. That's where you make the actual fibered pattern together. So you'd have one part of the machine pulling up, has the other part of the machine sends another thread through perpendicular to that first thread. It's warp and weft making a cloth. Now this is cotton cloth. And down on the lowest floor, they'd have machines that could dye the fibers. They'd have, of course, all the storage buildings. Now, there were so many buildings around, and a lot of them were doing the same thing, but some had differences, right? And they'd do special things. If they were taking in cotton that was already used, they had a special room where you could actually pull it apart. And if they're taking in more raw cotton than they liked and it had little knots in it, they had a room that would be called the card room, right? And then there was other rooms that do specialty jobs. For instance, you need wooden spools to draw these onto, and so you'd have to have a lumber room where you'd make the cylindrical spool. And some of these were so intricate that they had to have carpenters shape them. All right, so you had a lot of things going on in this huge area. And in the very back was the largest well. That was where the cotton was stored. It was right next to the railroad tracks, and that allowed them to store a massive amount of cotton for production times. So a lot of things are around here.
And tell us about the Hadley Falls home.
Okay, so across Canal Street from the administration and across the canal plus Canal Street from the production site, there was the Hadley Mills homes. These were built in 1848 for the canal diggers, and then by default, when they weren't used that much for diggers, they defaulted to the Hadley Mills themselves as a thread manufacturer. And so these homes are still there. That's incredible. So when you look at it, you're looking at these gorgeous homes that are from the very beginning of the canal system. And so you have a nice unit in the Hadley Mills area. You have the homes, the administration, the canal, and then all the production mills, and most of them are still there. And you can even see where the races used to be. There's even a bridge for pedestrians only that went from Canal Street and over the canal right into the production site. And this is where the workers to go in the morning, and at noon they come back out, and late at night they come back out again. So it's a whole system that was just incredible to look at.
And so quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. In there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 and they are perfect for fun, educational, outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. They are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what has become of the Hadley Mills?
Okay, so it was started in the early 1850s, and it was a cotton mill. And of course, any industry is going to change. And the lime mills actually pulled out of Holyoke. They were a cotton producer, and they pulled out in 1927. The Hadley mills hung on for a long time. It wasn't until the late 1930s that they had to give up because it wasn't being profitable anymore. Jobs are moving towards the south or overseas. Now, what happened to then? The Clinton Silk Mill bought out most of the production sites of the Hadley Mill, and there was silk production, and of course they already had the Skinner Silk Mills around, but the Clinton Silk Mills competed against them and did decently. Now, Holyoke ran into a lot of trouble in the 60s, and a lot of mills started to move away or just go out of business completely. And so what you have there now is, well, first, a furniture restoration company moved in called the Conklin Furniture Company, and they were in that production site for a very long time. About 5 years ago, this year, 2023, the marijuana production came to Holyoke, and they actually displaced Conklin Furniture, and they revamped the entire mill to be a marijuana production site. And there was a lot of revamping, millions of dollars were spent. And so that's what you had there. Now, I heard at the end of this year, they're going to be the first marijuana mill to leave Holyoke. They're going to go up to Connecticut. And they're pretty sure they can sell it to another marijuana industry because they revamped it so well. And so that's going to happen.
And what does this mill fit in, or how does this mill fit into the neighborhood scheme of Holyoke?
Okay. The industries of Holyoke have always been using power. They've always been mostly fiber, paper, some wire industries. This fits in very well, especially in the beginning, because it was meant to be a cotton mill right from the beginning. And it was meant to be where the canal was first dug, because it was one of the first, and the canal wasn't all ready right away. It was 2/3 ready within 10 years of its digging. So from 1848 to 1858, 2/3 of it was ready. But this wanted to get going right away in the early 50s, and so they put it right where the second level canal was meeting with the first level canal. And so it got a lot of good power that way. So also along the way, since it was one of the bigger mills, things around it developed, such as the Hadley Falls homes turned into their mill housing. There was a bridge built near there because there were so many people from South Hadley coming over the bridge into Holyoke to work at the Hadley mills. So you have a big bridge, and there was also a trolley barn right by here. Why? Because these mills in Lyman and Hadley were enormous in terms of the amount of people they employed. The Hadley mills employed 2,000 people, and so you needed to have bridges, trolley systems, and lots of homes around, and lots of stores. And this really developed the flats greatly. And so it developed a neighborhood, and it fit very well into the beginning industrial scheme of Holyoke. And with time, it's been well maintained. If you ask people, oh, where's the Holyoke Canal, they'd probably say that, oh, they're probably mostly talking about the second level canal because it's been so beautified and well maintained through the year. And they'd probably point out the Hadley Mill because it's very obvious where it is. And they wouldn't know the more obscure mills around. So thank you for listening to this podcast.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. You can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Mr. Robert Coleman, which he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Massachusetts. Now, you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, and on this one, the Hadley Falls worker houses look exactly like the worker houses in Chicopee Center area next to the canal. And I found out they're made by the same two men.
Now, that's very interesting. So now today we're going to be talking about the Hadley Falls Workers' Houses tour. So what is the history of these homes?
Well, in 1847 to 1848, they started work on the first and second dam, and they started work on the canal, and they started working on the worker homes, and they started working on the two mills, the Hadley Falls Mill and the Lyman Mill. And to do that, first thing you need is the worker houses, because you go to work, and there's nowhere to put all these workers, 1,000 to 2,000 workers. You have to get worker homes. And so these were the first thing developed in the industrial Holyoke. There, of course, were farmhouses before that, but this is the first of what was going to be a great industrial city. Now, the homes have lasted in pretty much their original look from that point to now, and that's incredible because most things change through the years. But along the way, they were so well built, and most things back in the 1840s and 50s were very well built. The two original first mills are still there. The canal is still functional. The second wooden dam is still functional. And that's the way people built back there, to build it to last and be solid.
Now, why is there one set missing?
All right, there used to be 6 units or sets that could house up to maybe 200 to 300 people each. And so you can get a thousand or two workers in there. But I believe in the 1930s, one was taken out by design because in the 1930s you had a great need for gas stations. And so if you look on Canal Street, there used to be 2 on Canal Street and 4 on the side streets. One of the one on Canal Street was taken out. And so you took out one of these beautiful things, but they put in something very practical for the 1930s, and that was a gas station when there wasn't enough of them around.
Now, before we finish with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of these various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. There he has both videos of the various stops along each tour, also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT4214B@yahoo.com. And they make it perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions or get-togethers. They're also good for just getting outdoors for the day. So now getting back to our interview, do these homes still look like the originals?
Yes, they've made sure that through the years they kept them going. In the 1970s, they started to need some repairs, and they kept them pretty close to what they were. The original from the 1840s did not have shutters on the windows, and shutters were added to a lot of the windows. And when they fall off, though, they're not replacing them because they're trying to get back to the original look. Also, the sidewalks now are either concrete or brick, but back in the 1840s and 50s, they were made out of dirt. I think the brick look is great. It goes in with the theme of Holyoke having brick walks around, but some people like the concrete a little bit better. The backyards of each of them used to be where the outhouses were, so people would use them as latrines. Those are gone, thankfully. And so in the back, you have courtyards, and then you have a common space where you can actually go back there if you want. And it's a great look, and I hope they keep up that look. Most of the units are owned by 2 or 3 units at a time by a given person, and many of them try to keep up that old-time look.
Now, why are they similar to the ones along the Chicopee Canal?
All right. John Chase and his sidekick, James McClellan, made the Chicopee Center Canal, and they made the mills, and they made the worker homes, and they made them with a certain look, of course, and they were made in 1832, all of these pieces. In 1848, the same 2 men made the Holyoke Canal system, its dam, its canal, its first 2 mills, and its worker houses, and so those pieces look the same, especially the worker houses. I think the worker house in Chicopee are maybe about 5 to 10 feet taller, but they have the exact same old classical look that when you go visit either one of them and then you go to the other one, you're astonished that, my goodness, they have the same look to them. And they're pretty well maintained. I think the ones in Holyoke are a little better maintained, but they look pretty good. And people should look at both and see and understand how this happened.
Okay, now, so thank you for educating us on your tours, and we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune in to a large selection of our other podcasts and much more on his website, again, at holyokecanaltour.org. And also, again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about any other questions at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. And thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from Chicopee, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Camus. He offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
That's right, and I've done Holyoke Canal tours for 9 years now, with all their mills included.
And today he'll be educating us on the mills of Holyoke. So what will you study in the series Mills of Holyoke?
Okay, I hope you study the properties of the mills, including when they started, what canal they are on, what they made, how they changed through the years, what leadership they had, what kind of workers they had, how they contributed to the community itself, how they were ranked according nationally about whether the leader or not. And when I get through these mills, people would have learned a lot because very few people study the actual specifics of these mills. And generally on the tour, they tell people what they are, but I don't go into great detail. And I also want to know where the power engines were for turbines that really were important during the canal days. And during this podcast, we'll talk about how I learned about these things. And I learned about lots of mills. There might be up to 80 mills in Holyoke that were upon the canals using the canal power water. And I hope to give presentations on most of the important canals. Mills. It'd be impossible to do all of them, I guess. But, I want to get through some of it. And I want to develop my knowledge because when I do canal tours with people, I want to explain in more detail what some of these mills are doing.
And so what resources do you use?
I use old maps, including street maps and general layout maps, but very importantly, there's called the Sanborn insurance maps. And for Holyoke, they covered 6 different years. And so you get a sense of how the mills have changed with time, what different sections of the mill has changed in use, and they also tell you what different use each floor had. So when you look at a given mill in Holyoke, the 4th floor is used from a different use from the 2nd floor. And that may change with time, and maybe not. And the Sanborn maps actually tell you these because they're fire insurance maps, and they want to know what compounds or chemicals are located in different sections so that there will not be a fire there or what way to insure that company in. It's very important. So also I use city directories. I use the Holyoke History Room archives. I use genealogy because you get to learn about the presidents and important people, the engineers that work for the company, so forth. I also use resources like old books that are written about the time. I also use the Holyoke Daily Transcript because that newspaper really was a powerful newspaper. It explained lots about its community through the years. So if you have a given mill, like the Skinner Mill, then what did they do? Well, the newspaper might explain what they did and what direction they went in terms of management, or what direction they went in terms of charity, or how they treated their workers. And so all these resources are very powerful. And if you really choose the right mill, you get to learn a lot about the community and how they fit in together with the other mills, how they sold a certain part to another mill, or how they sold components to another mill. And of course, there's always interaction between them. And so hopefully this will work out. I've just started scratching the surface on a few of the mills.
And so quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. In there he has both videos of the various sites throughout the steps from each tour, and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you're interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family, or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, What are some of the mills that you will discuss?
All right. Well, I'll probably start with the more popular ones along the way, and then go into the ones that get very little attention. Do you know that there was a Chadwick mill in Holyoke, and that they made artificial seal skins for people? Very few people will know that. But of course, you go into the Skinner mills and the Far Alpaca mills and the Perkins mills and the Whiten mills, and those changed a lot through the years, both physically in the mill layout, and also they changed the amount of workers, type of workers they had through the years. There was always a certain kind of engineer they used in the beginning, then developed into another kind. And I want to explain all these things. But some of the mills that don't get much attention, such as the Albion mill, why not explain all the details of what they're doing? People might be interested in 100 years ago, how was a book made? How well was it made compared to nowadays? And they'd be interested in little companies that might have been competing with the big companies like the Clinton Silk Company or the Connor Silk Mill. And they might be very interested in the Far Alpaca Mill because how did they get that alpaca wool up from Ecuador and Peru into Holyoke in order to make alpaca clothing for people? And why were they doing that? So people love these kind of things, how society has changed over the years.
And what other series will you be doing?
Okay, I hope to be doing a presentation series on many topics, one on a specific house, a house through time, where you talk about what the occupants through the years have contributed to the community, whether it was mill work or community work or medical work, so forth. I started that in the year 2020 and it was very well received. I'll continue it this year and I hope to continue it every year. So that's one series. I've been doing a series on parks, as in touring the parks, but last year I had a indoor presentation on the Olmsted Parks of Holyoke. I also want to go into the parks in general, all the parks, and how they were made. And when you have series like this, and you draw loose ends together, you draw interesting facts together, it really profoundly helps people understand all the components together. And that's very little done because it's very hard work. But I want to continue also things I've done in the past, have many tours, and develop things in the future. And one series might be a series on the cemeteries of Holyoke, another series on the reservoirs of Holyoke, and not only in Holyoke but outside of Holyoke, and how they bring the water into Holyoke. So these things that bring things together would be great.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's hoyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in.